The lodges, dams, and trails of Iowa's state parks were not built by great architects, great engineers, or great naturalists, but they were built by great men. The parks where we enjoy boating, camping, picnicking, or just relaxing are the result of years of hard labor from the men of the Civilian Conservation Corps.
This nation is asking for action, and action now.
President Franklin Roosevelt founded the CCC in March of 1933. The effects of the Great Depression, unemployment, and recurring drought and dust storms, combined with the lack of a national welfare system, created an urgent need for employment for young men. Roosevelt used the CCC program to fill that need and also to improve conservation and erosion measures in the U.S. In the first year of the CCC, 12,800 men were enrolled in Iowa. By the time the CCC program was discontinued in 1942, enrollment in Iowa had increased to over 46,000. Nationwide, over 2.5 million young men served in the Corps. In Iowa, CCC men worked on conservation and construction projects in 41 different parks. The Conservation Corps in Iowa was organized at Fort Des Moines, where the men received initial training and conditioning. From there, companies were sent to various locations around the state, where they set up camp and began a regimen of training, schooling, and work. Companies were organized in a military fashion and were supervised by officers pulled from the military. But leaders for the work groups were chosen from the ranks of young men. Initially, the CCC camps in Iowa were set up as tent cities, with only the officers' barracks being of sturdier construction. Later, as camp routine was established, the enrollees built more permanent quarters. These camp complexes also included buildings for the office, camp store, infirmary, and tool storage. Once the men arrived at their camp, they settled into a strict military-style routine, rising before dawn and working at their assigned sites until noon when lunch was delivered.
I was a truck driver, and it was the duty of the truck driver to set up the rations. We would set the sandwiches up in a square, such about the size of a card table. We also had to make the coffee, and that was made on a little rebar grate that was a wood fire built under it.
At the end of the afternoon work shift, the men would return to camp and change into dress uniforms or clean civvies in time for the 5:15 dinner bell.
We were in the mess hall eating one day, and we had beans to eat, and they were really salty. And during this deal, we weren't supposed to say anything about we didn't like the food. This one guy says, "Boy, them beans are salty." Turned around and looked up and seen this mess sergeant standing there. So he said, "But that's just the way I like them."
Evenings were spent on recreation, classes, and study.
2 nights a week, I took cooking and bakery school. We made pies and we got to eat the sweets, and I did that about 4 weeks. Oh, they had different things for them to do. Some of them was agriculture, and some was like I was, and some was, they had different things. But that was the only project that was interesting to me.
Lights out was at 10 o'clock, with a bed check at 11. Enrollees alternated taking weekends off to go home. Those left in camp were responsible for the general upkeep of the barracks and grounds.
I was the infirmary orderly, and there was a building to maintain. The building had wooden floors and waxed the same as the barracks floors were. The floors had to be steel wooled, get them down to the bare wood and start over with wax. It was a bar of soap type of wax.
Enrollees were paid $30 a month, 25 of which was sent back to their families to provide relief from the hardships of the Depression. The $5 that remained were usually spent in the camp canteen or on entertainment in nearby towns.
Candy, cigarettes, gum. That was really about it in the commissary. Cigarettes were a dime a pack, as I remember.
Some camps published a monthly newspaper filled with news, stories, jokes, and drawings from the men in the camp. As when any large group of young men gets together, there was a lot of minor troublemaking and practical jokes that took place.
I got kind of lit up. I had a few beers, so I seen that cat out there, and I had an idea to go and level it, level the ground. So I knew where that guy was bunking, so I went in there and got his keys for the caterpillar and started it up. And of course I woke a lot of guys up, and he came out there with the company commander, and he said, well, aren't you going to do something about that? You come up here and swipe the keys and everything. And he said, hell, if he wants to work, let him work. So I worked there till 2 o'clock in the morning, so I shut it off and went to bed.
Well, see, the outhouse is a latrine, they call it. And then it had a lid in the back to where you could raise it out so the guy could come along with a scoop and clean the thing out. Well, they deliberately would set a fire for a prankster. They'd light a paper, see, and they'd smoke the building up. Well, they thought maybe it was on fire. The company commander wasn't too favorable when pranksters like that went on.
Disagreements among the men were uncommon, but there were solutions if they did occur. Some camps used KP duty as a form of punishment for fighting or misbehaving, while other camps encouraged enrollees to put on gloves and box as a solution to disagreements.
Out in the field, the guys would get mad at one another. When they come in at night, they'd either put the boxing gloves on or bareheaded and do their fighting in the company street.
At one time they had several CC camps meet in Fairfield in the Armory building, and as I remember, there was 90 rounds of fights of people from different camps, in competition, and some of those people went on to be professional.
The citizens where CCC towns were located were a little wary of the groups of boys that overran their towns on the weekends.
They kept the dogs and the local girls in the house.
But overall, the situation benefited both the boys in camp and the town economy.
We didn't have enough money for liquor, so we bought ice cream. People in Boone, they made more money off us at the ice cream parlor than they did from the local people. But I think that's where the bulk of the money went. But there wasn't much money to begin with. $5 a month,
The term of service for enrollees was 6 months, but they could re-enroll for a total of 2 years. At the end of his service, each enrollee was given a certificate of discharge, which could be used as a reference in future job searches. For many of the CCC veterans, discharge certificates were the most precious mementos of their experience, and they are still treasured today. The legacy of each and every enrollee is seen today in our state parks. These parks represent not only the time, sweat, and labor that each man contributed to environmental conservation, but also the memories, friendships, and life stories of the men of the Iowa Civilian Conservation Corps.